Hello everyone, this is Jimmy Beach. Welcome to this exposure webinar. This will be a fun creative lesson today. We will go through how to stack multiple effects in exposure. The robust library of presets in exposure are filled with great looks. And those looks are easy to use and they look great on their own, but when they're combined together, there are lots of artistic possibilities to explore. Now, exposure, for those of you who don't know, exposure is our advanced non-destructive raw photo editor and organizer. It can be used to copy images from camera cards, apply editing adjustments, creative effects, export finished photos, and even print. Today, we're going to keep focused on blending presets together, but exposure is capable of a whole lot more. Now, a quick history lesson about exposure is that it originally started, it was originally developed for film photographers. The transition from developing analog film in the darkroom using chemistry to processing in digital only using a computer, it was a tough thing to grasp for photographers transitioning. And the accuracy of exposure's film emulation presets helped make the change by giving photographers the look and feel of their favorite films once again. Now, in this lesson today, we're going to use multiple presets to create unique looks. Now, it's a creative process, and that means it's subjective, but it's also a lot of fun. And you can really perform it however you like, but the following suggestions that I will make during the demo will help you develop a process of your own. So you don't have to copy exactly what I do, but please do pay attention. So just like using a palette of different paints, we're going to use a palette of different presets today. So when painting, if you think about layering tones and hues to accomplish an artistic goal. So for example, if you want to paint a car bright red, you would first lay down a bright layer like white primer or gray to give it that red a little extra kick of vibrance. And then you will follow with like a bunch of layers of clear to build up depth and give it shine. So in much the same way, we're going to do that with these images with exposure presets today. So in searching through presets, I want you to think about how each one will be affecting the photo. I find that's the quickest way to narrow down which presets to use when you're doing multiple preset stacks. With the paint analogy, first to continue on that, you first make a decision whether you want to work with a bright or dark color, and then you establish the actual color or the tones, and then you would follow with effects on the top to make it blend and read as a cohesive look. And so that's what we'll do. All right, so we have a bunch of images here. Of a wide variety of images, as a matter of fact. And they're all fabulous works from Julian Berman. Notice that they are all different. I wanted to point that out. We have images here that are shot in a studio, a couple of those. We have some with some background context. Here's one here, editorial. We also have a landscape here, and we have a still life. Okay, so all of these are different. They have different highlights and shadows, they have different tones, they have different colors. And so because of that, that gives us a whole bunch of different scenarios that we get to work with, right? So, I mean, we even have a still life right here that makes me smell bananas every time that I look at it. In a good way. And so anyway, we have to put on our creative thinking caps when we come up with a look that works for all of these different scenarios. And that's going to be our plan. So, like I said before, the first thing that we're going to do is start with contrast and brightness. We're going to think about the bright level of the image and how it's going to look at the end. Okay? So, we're going to look at presets that make adjustments to contrast or brightness or luminosity. So what I'm going to do is open up the presets panel here, which I have. And then there's a bunch of different modes to view the presets. So sometimes as I open these, I may change the view of them. Here, let me open one. So here's there's two rows here, and this is 3 rows, and then sometimes I just put it like this so I can see the list of presets and I can see the names. This sometimes is a little bit easier for me to see. So anyway, so we're going to take a look in the following sections. Okay, so the following sections are going to give us contrast and brightness changes, and yeah, that's what they're going to do to this image. So we're going to first make adjustments to the light and dark values, okay, to the image. So the light and dark values, making those adjustments first will minimize back and forth when we make adjustments later. Once you add your color changes to the mix, you likely have some readjustments to make. So once we apply a look to all these images, we're going to have some more things that we're going to want to do to clean that back up. And when we do that, the contrast and brightness changes will change the behavior of color adjustments that you make later on in the process. So let's look in the following sections. We're making brightness and contrast changes. The first place I would look is color tonality. Let's open it up here. And you can see overexpose, shadow recovery, these types of things. These are actually going to do this to our images. So here I'm going to click on an image here with dark shadows. And we can look at shadow recovery to see what that does to his tracksuit. I think it's a tracksuit. It's a cool suit. But anyway, you can see how that makes some changes there. Ooh, that one's a little bit dark for that image, huh? Okay, that's color tonality. That would be a good place to start. Another place to start is bright. Bright presets. The bright presets, they do a lot for images most of the time. Give it a nice bright pop. And if they're too strong, that's fine. We can always turn down the effects of these layers with the opacity slider without having to make any other further adjustments. Now, as I'm making adjustments, we can see that we have this one single image down in the bottom of our grid. So that image has dark values to it most of the time, but we have other images like this one on the top that have light values everywhere. So what I'm going to do when I'm assigning these presets or looking through these presets is I'm going to select all of these, and then I'm going to hover my cursor over the different presets to see what they do to the image. And it will update on all the images as I hover over here. Now, so if I go to something that's light and airy, right? If we look at, I'm going to select that. So if we look at this image down here on the bottom, that really bleached that image out because this one had the most contrast to it. Because of that, I don't think it's going to work. So instead of applying that same look to all of these images, I'm going to hit reset again. Okay, so I like the color tonality looks, but I also like some of these, especially like these light and airy ones really aren't that bad. There's just a little bit of a punch, a little bit of a change. But because we have so much differences between the images here, you know, especially this one down here that's dark versus this one up here that's very bright, I have a suggestion that we can do before we apply any other presets, and that would be the auto adjustments. Ta-da! In exposure, we have auto adjustments that will intelligently apply different settings here in the basic panel. These ones right here, exposure, contrast, highlights, all the way down to haze level. So underneath the, if you click the auto button, it'll automatically apply them. If you go underneath the menu here, we can make an adjustment to it. For example, the exposure bias is the level in which exposure will try to set the exposure. So 0 would be exposure would be intelligently placing it where it sees fit. And usually I like it a little bit brighter than that, so I'm going to change it up. So we'll hit auto enhance, and then all those images will change slightly. And we can see that they all did pretty well, except for this one down here, which I think is still just a little bit overcooked. So I will deselect all of these with Command D. And then we can take a look here. And we can see it looks a little hot right up here. We might be losing some detail there. We're also one stop over in exposure, so I'm going to bring that down. and leave it like that. Okay. So we'll hit escape. Now we can go back through and we can check out each one of these images to make sure. If we hold down the # key, we can see the before and after of them. This is the first step in the process. We're just trying to we're trying to make some modifications to the highlights and shadows and midtones here. Okay, looks pretty good. So after we apply an adjustment or a preset, then we go through and we evaluate that preset. So that one looks a little bright to me, but I don't think it's bad. That was real subtle. Okay, we'll hit escape. We'll go back. So, okay, we have applied our auto adjustments, and now all of these images kind of have a similar look and feel. Okay, so now let's go back to those color tonality presets and see if there's one in there that we like. Actually, no, I'm lying to you. I think that I'm going to use one of these from the bright preset family. Okay, so before we get into that, I wanted to point out that I do have layers. Okay, so we just applied our auto adjustments, and they are right here in the basic panel. Now, if I apply another preset, as you see here, I'm hovering over one. We don't see any changes happening in the basic panel on the right side. See that? Those are all different. Okay, so let me select one. Let me go with the light and airy, and then I'll say subtle green. Okay, so I just selected the preset. Now it's applied to all of those images. You can see that they changed just a little bit. And then right here in the preset panel, we can see the name of the preset we selected. But all of the adjustments here on the basic panel have not changed. But if we go down to, let's say, the tone curve panel, we can see that there is a tone curve here. And if I go and hover over different presets, you can see that that tone curve changes. Okay, so the reason I'm pointing this out is that we did two different things to this image. We first did our outer adjustments when we clicked that button, and then the second thing we did was we added this preset. Now, I want to separate those so that I can have a different opacity control right here in the layers panel over each component. Okay, so I'm going to hit Command Z and escape from that. And then my base layer, I want to rename that basic. So those are my basic adjustments. Now I'll do the same preset here. I'm going to use subtle greens instead of vivid ones. And drag it right over to the add layer right there. And now I have a new layer with the subtle green, light and airy preset applied to it and a basic layer. Now I have a bunch of images selected here, so you can see that all of them have that same thing going on. Okay, so now what we'll do, since we just applied another change to these images. Now this down at the bottom of the screen here, it says multiple images are selected. You can see that. That is telling me that if I make an adjustment to this image, it's also going to make the same adjustment to all of the images. And that's what I want, because I want to have a consistent look for all of these images as close as I can get. Okay, so I'm going to make a couple of tweaks to this image right here, and that is mostly, I'm going to make one tweak to it. That is because I can see that the bright values in this image are starting to bleed together when we use that preset. So I'm going to take the preset and I'm going to turn it down a little bit, just until we have a little bit more contrast happening between the background here and the foreground of his shirt. Okay, that looks good. Let's go to the next image in the batch with the arrow button, or the next image in the folder. We can hold down the # key to see what we're doing there. That one looks good. I'm looking at the highlights here in the background. You can see back here in the window. I want to make sure that I'm not blowing out too much of that. And this one doesn't really have a lot of really bright highlights, so this one's looking good. That's good too. That one looks a little bright, but not bad. Okay. Ooh, Now, a place to look on here is these highlights in the sky, these values in the whites. I don't want to blow those out. I want to make sure that we have the detail, or we keep the detail in that sky. That one looks good. And that's our last one. Let's see what that looks like. There we go. Okay, great. All right, so now we have our first preset assigned here, and that is the subtle greens preset that we applied. So that looks good. Okay, so after we've done that, the next thing that we're going to do after establishing brightness and contrast is to think about the color and tonal values. And this step usually makes the most noticeable difference. I wanted to point that out. The first one was pretty subtle. The next one, going to be a little stronger. So here are a few suggestions as to how you can do that. So for bright or even looks, like for portraits or street photography, where skin tones are important to keep looking normal. Let me close all of these folders. Okay, skin tones, keeping pretty normal. The color film print and color film prints low contrast presets are great options because these have a little bit lower contrast. They also help make skin look smooth and healthy. And when it comes to the color that they add to it, they are very subtle. So there's a little bit of a pink, a little bit of a blue, a little bit of a gold color tone, and it does great things on the skin itself. And so another place to look for something where skin tones need to be as accurate as they can are the faded presets right here. So they are a little bit stronger, as you can see. And they also have some stronger color effects to them. But we can use the color or pull the color out of the preset and turn down how strong it is with the opacity slider. Remember how we did that with the first one. All right, so that is for more gentle effects for skin tones. But for punchy color and strong contrast, like where images are saturated and bold, for example, landscapes or macro shots or flower images, you would want to use something that gives you more color. So those, a great place to look for that, let me close all these again, is our color films slide. These slide films add a lot of punchy color to images, like Fuji Velvia. They have a lot of strong colors, a lot of strong contrast, and it will punch up all of them. Now, it looks really great when I'm, here, let me add layer. It looks really great when I'm here on the landscape. If I hold Fuji Velvia, right? That looks great and bold and colorful. But I've also applied it, and look at what it's done to this guy. He looks a little bit like a clown with all of that saturation in his skin. You can see how it's kind of breaking that skin up and creating some pockets where it looks like smoothed over, you know, or blocked up. That, not so good. Yeah, you can see it right here on his skin too. From the grid view, you can see where all that red tone is coming in. It looks blotchy. So, got to watch out for that with skin tones when you're using these really, really colorful presets. Another place to look for great looking colorful presets are in the Polaroid category. Polaroid uses a lot of different techniques that gives it a nice subtle touch. I like these a lot. Now remember, we're also just looking at the color values that they're putting on here instead of evaluating the entire brightness and all that. We will be able to make adjustments to that as we find a look that we think looks great on these images, and then we'll dial it in. So if you want to get a little bit more aggressive than these Polaroid categories, they are the cross-processed category. They are down here. And in the cross-process, you'll see that there are a bunch of color shifts for when you use, for example, you use a specific kind of film with another specific kind of developer, and it will usually create some sort of crazy color shift. Or if you use expired film or something like that, that can do it. Now, these Lomo ones typically have some sort of light leaks or something like that. They, like the film is expired, things like that. You'll see those looks here. Lots more vibrant color in these presets. Another place to look for colorful looks inside of exposure are the cinema presets. These have a bunch of different like historic looks that I think look great on their own, and they look great when you're mixing them in with a bunch of different presets like we're going to do today. So here we go. Here, these Technicolor processed ones are very, very cool. And you can see that we're adding some contrast. We're adding some punch to the color, and it actually starts to strip out some of those other tones, underlying tones that I don't care for. So I'm going to use this one, Technicolor 2-strip. Okay. Now that I have that applied, I'm going to do the same thing that I did before, and that is I'm going to zoom in on all the images and then dial the opacity of this control back so that it blends with the image nicely. There we go. So if we turn that off and on, we can see just a nice even tone to his skin, and then this background still stays nice and white. That looks good. Next one, let's see how this guy looks. All right, so that cut out the green tone that was happening in this background, conveniently. The green tone that was in the background is probably from mixed lighting. Now that one's really subtle, but I think that it makes his skin tone look a little bit less green, so I think that's another positive. That one looks good to me. And that one does too. And we'll hold down the / key. That looks good. We can see this one has quite a bit of change happening to it already, but I do like the red color that's popping on the top of the image when we don't have the / key held down. And then, oh, this is our landscape. It's come quite a bit. Looking good, though. Looks very cold with that green, with those subtle greens. He looks good. Ooh, and you can see the background on here goes from that pink to a more orange tone. That's nice. It also does add some warmth to his skin. It makes it look a little more healthy. Okay, so now we've gone through, we've applied a color look, punched up the color in the image, and we went through, we evaluated it, and now we've dialed it in. So we have our, let's go back over it. We have our brightness, and now we have our color situated. And the next thing that we're going to do, is we're going to take a look at our highlights and our shadows and give them more of a balance. So this is our third step. We're going to do this with another preset. So I'm going to hit Add Layer. Now remember that I have all of these images selected as I do this, so we're editing them all at the same time. They will all read similar in the end, is the hope that we're giving, or the goal of our look here, so that we give it a nice cohesive look. And this is like creating your own signature style. This is a way that you would do it. So let's talk about highlights, shadows, and the balance between those two. And we need to look over the images to make sure and think about what balancing adjustments we want to make. Okay, so the highlights, I think, are looking pretty good in these images. You know? But it does look like that has a little bit of color to them. That might be something I want to address. Yeah, that one looks pretty straight. Okay, so I like how the highlights are looking. I really do. But I think that we have a little bit too much tone in them, and I think that we could add a little bit more of a vintage flavor if we had something that didn't quite have as much of a tone to it. So let's take a look at what we can do to adjust the highlights and shadows. Dang. Okay. Let's see what we can do to adjust the highlights and the shadows. And so what we'll do is let me close all these preset folders, and we'll look at a couple of different ones here. So I'm going to look at color miscellaneous effects. Color miscellaneous effects have a bunch of different things that are actually really handy when you're making adjustments to highlights and shadows. I'm going to undo what I just did there. So I have another preset that's made up here, right? So we have our basic edits, light and airy. That's the first one that we did to set the bright versus dark value in the image. Then we added our Technicolor process to adjust the colors. And now we're going to look in like a color miscellaneous effects here. And I can see that there's a couple here, especially this one with desaturated highlights. So I'm going to select that one. That one looks good. So another couple of places that you can look to make an effect like this where we would make it a little bit more vintage looking. So you can see the desaturated highlights preset and what that does to this photo. It does give it a little bit more of a vintage editorial feel almost. Let's take a look at another image that is different than that. So here we go. This is before and after. You can see that it's pushing those tones of that background way back. And that's a really subtle change on that image, but I think it looks pretty good. So, okay, so let's say that we want to make more of a vintage look inside of our preset. What we would do instead, after, we can use some miscellaneous effects here to fade out a couple of the tones like we did. Another place to look is the color films aged group. This is definitely, here, let's change these so you can see them. There we go. These are definitely more aggressive when it comes to making changes to add, changes to the shadow and highlights and the balance between them. Another place that we could find some, oh, there we go. These are the ones I was looking at. I thought they looked weird. Anyway, you can see them in here. A lot of old school looks, like these look like old prints. Right? Now, some of them might be really strong as well, but that's the beauty of this, is you can always turn down the opacity or make other controls or use selections or anything like that to make this work with your image a little bit better. Another place that we could look to make our old looking effect or vintage are the vintage category. I was thinking of how to say or a vintage look, but it just wasn't coming out. Anyway, the vintage category, these are the oldest looks that you can. They have borders and textures, and they have scratches and things like that. Lots of grain, lots of color changes, but they look really great on your images, especially when it's the right type and style of image. For example, if somebody was driving a race car or something like that, that's really modern and up to date, I don't know if it would necessarily look great in a historic look like Kodachrome slide film. But again, it is a creative process, so it's all up to the artists themselves. Anyway, so this is another way that we can add a little bit more of a vintagey look, and we did by desaturating those highlights just a little bit, and we can see it as we click it on and off. Now it's more of a subtle look, and I like that. That's what I wanted. Okay, so now we've done three things to our image to comprise our layered look that's still subtle but still gives a slightly old-timey feel to our images. The last thing that we're going to do, this would be what we would do on a car, back to our car analogy, and that is to paint a whole bunch of layers of clear coat so that you give that more depth and interest. And so what we would do here inside of exposure is we would add things like the effects. We can add grain, we can add overlays, we can add borders, we can do a bunch of different things like that. So let's take a look at how we can do that. And so I'm going to do the same thing that I've been doing. I'm going to add layer. And now this layer, we've been going to presets over here in the presets panel to do this whole thing. These are looks where you click on them and they apply the whole kit and caboodle to your image. I'm going to close that panel. Now over on the right side, I'm going to open the grain panel, and we can see that at the top there's a drop down that says preset. So these are also presets. This one's just a grain preset. So these presets are definitely something that are very handy for you, and you can always create your own, even these ones, just for grain. So if we look at this image and we look at just, I'm not going to go with a black and white type of grain. Something like salt and pepper is going to be too strong, I think. These super fat grain looks are really nice when you're making something look really old, but that's a little bit too old for the look we're going for. So I can just choose something like regular grain, and I want to be able to see it, so I'm going to choose the 50% version. Now, the next thing that I'll do is zoom in so that I'm viewing the image in an area where I can see a highlight, and I can see a shadow, and I can see some midtones. And the reason that I do that is that I can make changes to the behavior of the grain and where that grain will display itself in this image right here on the grain panel. Now, dialing this in sounds like a really subtle thing to do, and it is. But at the same time, it's about the end image. It's not about the process to get there. And so what we're going to do, I think that in the shadow tones, in these midtones here, I can see a whole bunch of that grain. That's too much for me. So I'll turn that down. Now, on the highlights here on his shirt, I can't see any of the grain, so I'm going to turn that up just a little bit so that I have a touch of grain in those highlights. And then in the midtones, I can see those. Now in the shadow places in here, I can't see a darn thing, so... Oh, actually I can. Let's look on the shirt right here. I can see that that's already breaking up. Okay. There we go. Okay, that looks good to me. So I've made some adjustments to where it's going, where the grain is going to appear in the image, just so that it works with the image a little bit better and lays down. We can make some other adjustments if we want to, make it a little more rough or give it a little more color variation. But I think this preset's going to work for us just the way that it's looking right now. So I'm going to go and use the arrow keys. I'm going to look back through another image to make sure that one looks fine. That one had a bunch of shadows that I wanted to look at. And see, this one has a bunch of highlights. There, we can see that there's a little bit of subtle grain here. It's a little bit of subtle grain here in the midtones, and we still have a little bit of subtle grain here in the shadows. Okay, so that is a good balance with grain. So, you know, we're on a really good subject here, grain. So I'm going to open up the Preferences panel. Now, the Preferences panel, on the panel tab of the Preferences panel, you can see that there is a check mark to disable grain. So if you look over here on the right-hand side and I turn this off, grain disappears. I turn it back on and it's back. Now, if you turn off grain, this is a global adjustment, and that means that all of Exposure's presets will not use grain if you turn this off. So if you do not like the look of film grain on your images, you can turn that off right there, and then you don't have to worry about it. But anyway, I just wanted to show that you can turn that off if you don't want it. Let's do an overlay as well. So if I'm looking at these images, I have an issue on a couple of them. This one in particular, with all those darks down here at the bottom, I need to do something about that. This still life has a little bit of dark happening in the foreground that I might be able to mitigate or deal with a little bit. And this guy up here is a little bit, I don't want to say flat, but this is a little flat. And so I have an idea that we could use to fix or to make a change here, and that's to add an overlay. So we'll go to overlays. I'm still on my layer. This has grain effects, and now it'll have overlay as well. So I'm going to add a light effect. And then let's think of something that would go kind of all over the place. No. How about this one? There we go. No. This one's better. Okay. So, I'll take in a preset, or I'll take in one of these overlays, make some modifications to it. And I'll make it a lot bigger. And maybe you can see the method to my madness here. so far. I'm thinking if I put this down in this corner and then make it more subtle, obviously, then it would be affecting the shadows of this a little bit more. And we might be able to get away with it. So it is set to screen mode. It's okay. So screen mode, what screen mode does, as I'm making some more adjustments, screen mode will tell the overlay that it will only make effects or changes to the image when it is affecting anything that's darker than 50% gray. So obviously his tracksuit's darker than 50% gray, so that's why we can see that effect happening there. So I'm going to hit escape because remember we have selected all of the images for this. Now you can see on these different presets on the top, we really don't see any change happening to them. This one right here on the couch, you can see a little bit of brightening happening. But for the most part, we're only seeing this effect happening to this image on the bottom. Now we can see it on this one too. So here, let me move. There. Okay, cool. So now we've added that preset, or that little bit of overlay to all these images, and I think that that works really, really great with that to give us a little bit more of our contrast back, especially in this really dark area here. So as we flip through these, like, we can see what the final ones are looking like, and I'm thinking this is what we want. This is looking good. Okay, so now we've created this 5-layer process. So what I would, or 5-layer look. So what I would do is I'd hit the plus button here in the presets panel and save this as a new preset. And of course, when you do this, you can enter it into your own category and add a description. And inside of that description, you can do something like talk about the different layers that you've put in here. Auto adjustments, light and airy, Technicolor, overcast, etc., etc. Once you have that stuff done, you can use this preset again and again into the future, and it's always saved right here in exposure. Okay, so I did want to point out also that if you do save this look as a preset, that it also includes those automatic adjustments as well. So you can just take an image that's, that you get right out of your camera and apply the preset in one click, and you will be good to go. Okay, so that concludes our demonstration today. So I would like to turn our attention over to answering any questions you may have. Before I do that, I want to leave you with a couple of comments, and that is that if you'd like to get in contact with other exposure users, we encourage you to do so, and you can do that in our Facebook group, the Exposure Users Facebook group. Also, if you'd like to post your work and share it with us, we'd love you to do so. Please do it on Instagram and use our hashtag #MyExposureEdit. We want to thank you all for tuning in today and for your interest in exposure.